Okay, since SETI hasn't been to one of these before, the way this works is I read from the book that I'm sharing with everyone. It is about haiku and spirituality and how to incorporate both into your life to make your life a little bit richer. And then after these selected readings, we will get to play around with haiku and discuss what we have heard. The first reading is Diver from Seeds from a Birch Tree, and it starts with the haiku, Diver in the air, how little time goes by before he hits the water. That was written by Yamaguchi Seishi. Now, Seishi's comment on his haiku is, a diver stands on a diving platform, then he pushes off the platform and dives into the pool. The time between the platform and the pool is very short, the time it takes a man to fall. And Clark Strand, he comments, a reflection on the brevity of life, so simple, so perfect, it would have been a shame to say anything more. So, as in previous readings, the haiku paints an image and gives a feeling. And we move to ears. Sentimentality ruins haiku. The same can be said of most other kinds of poetry. When we exaggerate our emotion, it becomes a burden to the reader, making it difficult to experience the poem. What, then, is sentimentality, and how do we avoid it? Sentimentality is self-conscious emotion. We want to watch ourselves having that emotion. In such moments, the feeling turns too sweet. It becomes self-consciously precious or sad. In other words, something other than it is, if only in degree. The way to avoid sentimentality is simple. In the midst of an emotion, we stay with the image itself. If we can train ourselves to do this, the result will be a deeper, truer kind of poem. Consider the following haiku. East winds blow, ears emerge from nape-length hair, by Sugita Hisajo. Hisajo was a student of Takahama Kiyoshi. In this poem, a young girl, perhaps her daughter, is standing outside, or maybe walking on her way to school. Her hair has the bob cut traditional for Japanese schoolgirls. Its rich blackness completely frames her face, until the warm east winds blow. When that happens, the wind parts the hair at the sides, and ears emerge. Hisajo has caught the moment before sweetness goes too far. The result is a moment of oneness with the wind. We move then to two stones. One day an American woman who had been studying gardening for some time in Japan went to see her teacher. When they had greeted one another, he said, "Today I have to decide about two stones." Then, taking a large piece of chalk from the shelf, on the surface of the workbench, he traced the path along which they were to be placed. "What do you think?" he asked, and handed her two stones of uneven size. Examining them, the woman noticed that they fit together nicely along the left of the path. "No, that's all wrong," the teacher said. "You've made them look the same." "Okay," she replied. "Then what about this?" And she placed the stones about a foot apart, so that, having taken a turn in the path just beyond the first gray boulder, the second would become visible in just that moment. "Very sad," was her teacher's reply. "Now the stones can no longer see one another. If the smaller one sighs, the larger one will never hear." After that, the student tried several other configurations, taking longer to consider between each one. But her teacher only leaned against the door jamb and shook his head. Finally, he stepped outside to resume some other project, leaving the woman alone. The student was in despair. "I'll never learn," she told herself. "Maybe I ought to go back to America, because if I'm really honest, I have to admit that I have no understanding even after all these years. My teacher is just too kind to tell me I've been wasting his time." And with this last thought, she turned to leave the shed. As she was walking out, however, she realized that she was still holding the stones, one in each hand, so she placed them on the bench and left. She had walked all the way back out to the road when she remembered herself. It would be rude to leave without saying goodbye. He will only worry if I don't return. So she retraced her steps to the little shed. When she entered, however, her teacher barely greeted her. Instead, he remained facing the stones as she had left them. After a while, he said, "Yes, we will place the stones this way." Basho once said that a haiku is made by combining things. In practice, this means that a haiku is usually composed of two parts: a 5-syllable phrase followed by a 12-syllable one, or just the reverse.
Hey, Mom?
What's up, Merlin? On one hand, that was an interruption, but on the other hand, that actually kind of helps a little bit too, because it takes you out of the cerebral and into the present. Okay, I'm going to reread though, because I kind of lost my place with that. Basho once said that a haiku is made by combining things. In practice, this means that a haiku is usually composed of two parts: a 5-syllable phrase followed by a 12-syllable one, or just the reverse. So, breaking that further down, 5, 7, 5, but it is also 5, 12. One phrase sets forth the season, and the other juxtaposes some other image, and there's got to be a haiku in that somewhere. This arrangement of images in a formal pattern is governed by a principle which the Japanese call niku isho, 2 phrases, 1 poem. In other words, though the two parts remain distinct, together they form an impression which is more than the sum of their parts. That is, together they form a poem. Needless to say, it can be difficult to place two images together in a sincere, original way. Otherwise, haiku poets would not have labored for so many centuries over the art of juxtaposition. Strictly speaking, the work is never done. The pairing of images must be mastered every time we write a poem. He concludes that section with, "Late winter snowstorm. A button pops off and clicks on the wooden floor." Does anybody want me to reread that one? Late winter snowstorm. A button pops off and clicks on the wooden floor. So again, 2 separate images, but they're put together in such a way that it's also one sentence. We move to breaking the form. Knowing where and when to break the traditional form, and how much to break it, is a mark of mastery in the art of haiku. Because the form itself is the rule, there can be no established rule on how to break it. Only about 4% of classical haiku depart from the 5-7-5 form, and even then, usually by not more than 1 syllable. And there are other, less obvious aspects of the genre which can sometimes be tested while keeping the spirit of haiku. the limitation, for instance, to one event happening now. Suffice it to say, if a poet never breaks the form, that poet may not really be alive within it, whereas the poet who breaks it all the time isn't really writing haiku. In the early decades of this century, there was a movement away from the traditional form of Japanese haiku. Called the New Trend School, these poets, some of whom also later rejected the use of season words, wrote poems of more or even less than the traditional 17 syllables. The movement included many fine poets, such as Kawahigashi Heikigoto and Ogiwara Seisensui. The new trend movement soon fell away from the mainstream, however, and the classical norm returned. It seems to me that the proper understanding of free meter haiku is that the traditional form, so firmly established over the centuries, actually permitted such a departure. In other words, people tended to hear the traditional form within poems that were longer, or superimposed over those which fell short of the traditional length. Paradoxically, then, the form continued to work to the advantage of those very poets who violated it. Within time, however, that form was lost for the lack of clear defining limits. The dissatisfaction that grew out of this loss was evidently so profound by 1929 that Takahama Kiyoshi, the editor of the magazine Hotogisu Kuku, had only to announce that, in his opinion, haiku was a classical literary form written in the traditional way, and the demise of the new trend haiku was virtually assured. So the form itself establishes the limits to what can be taken. Earlier I said that there was no rule about breaking the form, but that is not entirely true. If breaking the form in a particular instance preserves the spirit of haiku, then the poet must break the form. Indeed, in such a case, abiding by the form would have killed that spirit. Even so, this is seldom really necessary to do. So what you're going for is the spirit of the flow and not forcing a flow. He gives some example haiku. These are all written by students of his. Long winter night, I opened the red cookie tin for needle and thread, by Carl Patrick. Summer evening, a park ranger's brief lecture about wildflowers, by Jerry Ball. Now notice that each of these is capturing a particular instance and putting you right there in it. On the Chinese vase, flowers retain brightness, pouring out water, by Dave McCroskey. Green awning, a water pail left in the doorway catches summer light, by Christine Shook. A cool August day. The nylon quilt I washed has lost its flowers, by Sister Benedicta. Now, I particularly like that last one because of how commonplace that is to just have something come off in the wash. That's something that pretty much everybody can relate to. Indeed. So 2 more sections and then I'll be done reading. Zen Tea. Once when I was visiting one of my Zen friends, he offered to make me some tea. When he went into the kitchen, however, he discovered he was out of tea bags. So he brought 2 cups in anyway. Placing one of them before me, he said simply, "Zen Tea." and we both laughed. Probably you have heard this kind of joke before. It plays upon the popular understanding of Zen as something empty. My friend was making fun of that idea. He was actually sorry that he had no tea to offer, so he offered the joke instead. The sort of empty-headed Zen my friend was making fun of actually gets a lot of play in American haiku. A well-known poet once printed a single word in the middle of a page and called it haiku. The poem caused a lot of discussion among American haiku poets. Some said it was a haiku, others said not. The real surprise was that there was any discussion in the first place. It should have been obvious to anyone who understood haiku that, if anything, it was only a kind of joke. The point is this: the first time you are served Zen tea is delightful. Thereafter, it is only a disappointment. So that's something to think on. That can apply to a lot more things than just that. Yes. Very existentialist indeed. Okay, the last reading, Haiku and Zen Poetry. Yes, we do tend to relish the first occurrence of it. And that's exactly what makes it such a fresh thing. In general, it is permissible to say that haiku is a type of Zen poetry. But in light of recent poems published under that guise, we might better say it is not. Not Zen poetry the way it has come to be known in America today. In fact, haiku is different even from the traditional Zen poetry of China and Japan. In practice, Zen poetry alludes to or takes as its subject some aspect of the doctrine, history, or practice of Zen. So it would be more like a subset. Its purpose is nearly always to convey some sense of the fundamental truth of Buddhist teaching. In the history of Zen, both in Japan and in China, where Zen was known as Chan, there have been many fine examples of this kind of poem. Today, many readers are familiar with names like Po Chiu-i, Ikkyu, and Ryokan. Even in America, there are a few poems to be found, for instance among those of W.S. Merwin, which convey the truth of Zen. In most of what has been offered by Americans as Zen poetry, however, there is a layer of spiritual posturing which, once you know what to look for, is as easy to tell from the real thing as night from day. In haiku, there must be no posturing at all, especially spiritual posturing. I often say to students that when they have composed a real haiku, that is the point at which we can legitimately begin to talk about their verse in terms of Zen. A Zen haiku is simply an ordinary haiku composed in the ordinary way. I have noticed, however, that almost no one is able to do this. The object is not to create some special kind of poem, but merely to relax into the moment as it is, and abide there peacefully, even in the act of composing a poem. Almost always there is some subtle posturing. Those students who come to my workshops are often surprised when I present the basic principles of haiku, and want to write some seemingly freer or more difficult kind of poem. I always ask them just to try it anyway. It seems that very quickly they realize its challenges, and by the end of the workshop everyone has some understanding of how haiku can be used as a spiritual practice. And those who have come expecting to write a Zen poem discover firsthand that this cannot be accomplished merely by a wink at the Buddha, but must arise directly from the haiku mind. Thoughts? Comments? throwing eggs at me?
No, it just puts that seed out. It's not what these instincts to do to make it as simple as you can to ground your consciousness into the present. Bless you.
I have what?
Bless you.
That's not how
Well, when you hiccup, the soul gets expelled out of the body just like a sneeze, according to the ancient Egyptians. And this is why I know all these weird things, because I read books, so that I can use them for people. And get the what?
Because I read books.
Yes.
I read books, motherfucker.
This is the best way to explain anything. Two scenes.
So before, we've just been focusing on writing haiku, getting the image into that syllable breakdown. Do we want to practice with trying to do the two images in one poem?
Yeah, I think about it. If I can come up with anything that would be worth writing down, maybe I need to be on the right side of it.
I have one.
Okay. Yes, sure. Ooh. Do I scare you now? The nightmarish visage here. Maybe we can trade? I like that.
That was based off of your guys' initial reactions to my login earlier.
Did you want to go yourself? Yes. So, do we usually put them into the text, or do we usually read them?
If you put them in the text, then that means that I can store that and easily be able to put it into a collection of everybody's haiku at the very end of all of these things to share out, so that everybody can look and go, oh wow, we did a thing.
Yes. That makes sense.
You can read it too if you want.
A wayward gesture, full mug dashes on the floor, hot seas and tile islands. That's nice.
I have that.
Of course, that also makes me mourn the tea, but that's very nice.
Well, but it's also reminiscences of like the sea became an ocean.
And
Yeah, it happens to me all too often because I forget where I place things, and it's really common where I just find myself staring at it and appreciating the beauty of the moment and letting go.
that one's actually really zen, too, because it shows the impermanence, because you've got the mug that's spilled.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that was good.
Said he outdid me.
No.
good for people that can actually produce poetry. Not me. I feel important.
Jaeger, you did some, and don't even. They were great.
Yes.
It's okay. At least, like, Oxy had that one session where all she did was poems about cat butts.
Yes, that was hilarious.
She, like, made, like, 4 poems about cat butts. Just cat butts, USA. Oh, the cat butts.
Let's see. La 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 la.
Damn it.
La 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 la.
I was thinking about colors, and then all I could think about was that fucking shirt that was like, look at all the fucks I don't give. 1 fuck, 2 fuck, 3 fuck, 4 fuck. My brain is in a great place right now. Aww. That's so cute.
That's awesome.
Like, totes adorable, by the way. Like, he's so cute.
Thank you.
He's like, all of that work up, and he's just like, I want to play Crash Bandicoot. Very adorable.
Okay, since made a haiku based on their avatar right now, and based on mine.
Wait not for the knights, in cape and foil guile commands, dancing dealers of fortune.
Gypsies.
I like.
Gypsies. Fucking gypsies.
I'm a gypsy now.
Oh god, you're a Brazilian gypsy.
Yes.
Gypsy level over 9,000.
Couldn't be any more of a whimsy tipsy gypsy.
Max level gypsy. Full skill set. Maxed out in every skill of gypsy.
420 budget. No scope gypsy.
No scope wallet scoop.
What else? If anyone can find the reference and know what I'm referring to in this next one, will win a prize.
Sea roars behind dunes, seabirds scream in key unknown, just another song.
Yes. Fond memories of childhood vacations in Massachusetts. Cape Cod. Living away from the sea is always sort of been hard for me for some reason.
I'm about to make you jealous, but I was born and raised in Maine, so like all day, every day, bruh. Oh god, Jaeger, you
Yes, it is. You already sent it to you. I can't even remember the words. Oh my gosh. Oh, your sanity. Yes. Will not vanish, I promise. Gosh. What I was going to say, though, is it's interesting because you say every year here, I search high and low for you, little now, Lord. And each of those kind of leads you to a distinctly different idea. Every year here gives you one idea. I search high and low for you. That gives you a picture, not like, you know, seeing wars being like dudes, but it gives you an idea, an image of first, you know, the recurrence of time, the cycle, every year, and then searching, and then it's completely contextualized by the last, and it's just a slight deviation of, it's a slight deviation of all that you got, enough to make it really normal, I think. You had me on you.
That was your favorite part. Well, it's just like, I don't, those fucking, like, I like, candy corn sucks, okay? But, like, little mallow pumpkins, those are the shit. Like, I fucking
Oh, yes.
love mallow pumpkins. And they're exactly the same as candy corn. I know this, but they fucking taste better. So I only want the pumpkins.
But then you misuse pumpkins.
Delicious. It's like, yeah. I like them. But I couldn't have pumpkin on the last one, so I had to parkour. But I think that's pumpkiner.
You had to parkour it?
Parkour, yeah.
Yes.
Parkour, hardcore. I saw a video of people doing drunk parkour one time.
Oh, okay. It's very safe. Very wise decision in life.
They were okay, they just smashed their face.
Smash move.
Seriously though, they were drunk and they didn't feel it.
Yeah. It is possible to previously risky things here.
Parkour, like, always makes me cringe, or, like, prepare to cringe, because usually people either do something really cool that's still cringeworthy, or they fucking eat shit.
Yes. There is no middle ground.
No. It's either you win or you fail. Parkour, there is no middle ground.
Parkour.
Parkour.
Let's see.
Here's a couple.
Bacon seasoning. Yours melted. I like it. Due for existential crisis. Bacon in the pan. Eager faces before me, dancing as they wait. Sounds ominous, this one.
Well, you know, Soylent Green bacon.
Oh,
the
cool.
keeps pet don't eat for bacon.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Does he call him bacon?
I don't know the name of the pig. All I know is he texted me and he has a pig now.
Wilbur.
People have pigs here. There were these people. I was going to the grocery store one time, and there was this Asian couple, and they had this tiny little pig, and it had like they had to pick it up because like it couldn't walk on tiles or some bullshit. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they just had a little arm towel that they put the pig on, and we're like holding it on this arm towel. It was ridiculously cute. Yeah, a lot of people here have pigs actually.
So cute.
You got to start wearing purple so I'm stuck in my head.
Your sanity.
I'm glad I
Your
don't
very
know
shit
it.
brothers.
Catchier than the plague.
That's pretty darn catchy. I'm scared.
Exactly.
Once. And this.
Hardcore parkour now. Tumbling as the autumn leaves.
With chains and ribbons. There's the second one as like a sequence.
I just like when they try to do backflips on sand, and they always just like face directly into sand. Every time. I have seen someone do a successful sand backflip.
Is probably like something.
They always try to do it off of like half-buried exercise balls too. I don't know why.
Oh, the exercise balls.
Fucking dumb.
Those things can be really dangerous.
Yes. Especially if you decide to run up and run up somebody.
Yes. Yes, Google. At the very least.
Or have you seen where people like hold them on their bellies and then run at each other like exercise ball jousting?
Yes, being run against each other and
Like a semi-large guy and this small, wispy looking girl. It didn't even go for the girl.
no, I believe it.
She bounced off the floor.
I gotta go bounce. I'm gonna bounce.
But yeah, it did not end well for her.
Goodness. Well, they were bipolar, I guess.
Yeah, probably. There was some purple in there somewhere.
There must be in their pants.
It has to be.
In your head. There is purple in your future.
Well, that's it for you then. You're fucked.
I can read it in your palm. Look at this purple line.
Look at all this motherfucking stuff. Look at that shit.
Now may I tempt you with purple suits. Bacon.
Bacon? Bacon?
Bacon.
For a while here they made purple ketchup.
I remember that.
Wow. That doesn't sound very...
They had green too.
I don't...
Yeah, purple and green ketchup. It was not
Purple and blue and all those good tones, they don't really infer a lot of appetite. Like, imagine if you're...
eat my green ketchup burger.
Yeah. your blue, purple, people beef. So yummy. You can add the soap both.
Yeah,
My
maybe
goodness.
meatloaf with it. That'd be kind of weird.
Halloween meatloaf.
It'll be like staring at the tomb or something.
Well, I mean, if it were Halloween, it could be like, it's zombie meatloaf, play.
It's spooky. Spooky meatloaf.
It's all too creepy. Have you not seen that? There's like creepy now too, apparently. Creepy and now I just imagine like two like little imp creatures, but they're like derpy as fuck.
Creepy and spook.
Creepy and spook.
Yes.
Like, every year, Creepy and Spook try to prove themselves at Halloween, and they just fuck everything up because they're basically moon.
No.
The adventures of Creepy and Spooky the Skeletons.
Spook-based fairy skeletons.
Fairy skeletons. Let's just fairy skeletons.
Spook-based scary skeletons.
So here's our response.
I just love how that became like an internet meme, so anytime anything is spooky, it's just like, you get into that music now, and it makes me really happy.
Yes.
It's like,
It's the Jesus way. To celebrate the fact that you have a box. Yeah, you do.
well, let's see them. Honestly, all the things.
I just shared the one I did for Athena. Because you can hear them practicing through the wall of the building while I'm sitting in the car on the other side of the parking lot.
That makes sense.
Sorry, I didn't quite make the connection there. My bad.
How forgivable. Can you
I
believe
know,
that?
I'm sorry.
It's okay, you're forgiven. You've not sat with me while she's been practicing.
Experience I quite want.
This voice sounds significantly aggravated. Now my mind is full of empty.
Better than it being full of fun.
True.
That's true. I'd rather have the empty.
Empty is nice, it's relaxing.
Maybe if I jump.
Jump it. Do the jump.
Parkour.
Parkour.
Static.
Static. Gotta go find
It's okay, Sadie, it happens.
You know,
Yes. I saw that. He was promptly executed by someone.
No, the other guy was executed. Santa
Hello. What's up?